Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech haolam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu Lasok b'divrei Torah Lasok b'divrei Torah Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba Lasok b'divrei Torah Yadai-dai-dai-dai-dai Yadai-dai-dai-dai Yadai-dai-dai-dai Yadai-dai-dai. Our blessing says, Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who gives us pathways to holiness, including the obligation to engage, literally like gears, la'asok, to get busy with words of Torah. And so we're hoping people are engaged, that this is not an academic exercise. This is not, oh, that's interesting. Now what? No, all right, I'm going to go catch up on Succession now and have some snacks. No, this is like we say, we study in order to do. And so what are we going to study? Briefly, because I probably used up half my time. Yeah. We're at 2 minutes. Abby, I know you're answering the door. This keeps popping in and out. I need those handouts when you get you. Yeah. I'll hand them out. Well, yeah, it's gonna be. So, that'll be the big reveal. I don't know why this keeps cutting in and out. Thank you. You're the best. We've got a double portion. I'm only going to talk about one of the Torah portions this week. It's Parshat Kedoshim. It's from the book of Leviticus. Kedoshim related to Kadosh, Kedusha, holiness. And when we think of holiness, sometimes we think of, like a up on a mountain, or holy. It's like, something separate from the world. And actually there is a sense of separateness in the word holy. But holiness can also, in addition to being the quality of a prayer or a person or a book, it can be the quality of a society, an economy, a city, a country. How do you have a holy country? There's laws, a whole bunch of them. It says here in the middle of Kedoshim, Lo ta'asu avel b'mishpat. Don't do an injustice in your justice system. And there's a sense of violence in avel. Yeah, if you're a judge, if you're part of a system, don't do violence through your justice system. Rashi, who's a famous 11th century winemaker and Torah commentator, says, don't render an unfair decision, an avel b'mishpat, an unrighteous, illegitimate one. A judge who does so is a loathsome reptile, says Rashi. This word unrighteousness is associated with abomination. Everyone who does these things, he's quoting Deuteronomy, everyone who deals dishonestly is abhorrent to God. Elsewhere you learn, don't bring an abhorrent thing into your house. Reject it as abominable and an abhorrent. I got this from my friend Doug Amar, and this is going to be your lead-in. Yeah, and Doug is a friend of Tamara.
And a new friend of yours.
And a new friend of mine.
And some of you may know Doug. Leanne knows Doug.
And, how do we deal with mistakes? How do we deal with injuries, wounds, again, from people to people? There's some ways that we can talk about that. But this, to me, is Avel B'Mishpat. And you'll see this graphic from the Georgia Justice Project.
Okay.
Tens of thousands of people in jails and prisons, hundreds of thousands of people in jails and prisons. 1 in 18 people in Georgia are either in jail in prison, under probation, or involved in parole. That's the highest rate in the country. 4.5 million people with a criminal history. And so I just love that we're talking about this in a synagogue, because that's what we got to do. That's why this is one of my superhero friends. I just love who you are, Tamara, and that you're bringing this to us, because this is Av Elba Mishpat. This is violence through a justice system, and it's up to us as Jews to take care of at least our part in fighting that. So
All right. So we have a limited amount of time tonight, and we are. This is a beginning. Certainly for this community, it's not a beginning of this problem or a beginning of advocacy around it. And we're going to spend some time tonight talking about what it is. This is actually a really nice illustration that's going to help short circuit a piece of the agenda, which is good because we don't have a ton of time tonight. But I hope that when we leave here, we have a better baseline understanding of kind of the what is it that we're talking about, what does it mean to be fighting mass incarceration and criminalization, and a commitment to continue moving forward, even though we have some plans, we have a few things in mind, but we also have a pretty big slate, right? We have a lot of pieces of this puzzle, and we don't have it all put together. So I should introduce myself. There are definitely some faces I don't recognize, so I imagine that may be true for others as well. We are such a big group that I don't think we can do deep introductions, or we would pretty much use up all of our time. But I do think, give us your first name, and some people love this and some people don't, but just one word about how you're feeling. Just so that we have a sense of like, who's in the room, what energy's in the room, and we can do this pretty quickly, and we'll definitely go to our friends on Zoom as well, because otherwise I feel like we're not even saying hello. We will have a few minutes, so he said, yes, you can watch your Succession later, but definitely help yourself to a snack. Now, Michelle Casper was kind enough to bring some nosh so that people have something to eat. So. My name is Tamara, and I am feeling inspired. Rabbi.
I'm Rabbi Mike. I am I'm jazzed at the size of the crowd.
Yes.
I'm Joe, and I'm feeling hopeful.
I'm Carolyn, and I'm involved.
I'm Kevin, and I'm restored.
I'm Sandra, and I am hopeful.
I'm Eileen, and I am hopeful. I thought of that before those.
I'm Maida, and I'm interested.
I'm Sylvia, and I'm curious.
I'm Leanne, and I'm intrigued.
I am Jane, and I am happy to see so many people here.
I'm Kathy, and I care.
I'm Michelle, and I feel engaged.
They need to. Okay.
I'm going to wait.
Yeah, apparently we really do need to use the mic. Okay.
I'm Lauren, and I always follow Abby's instructions. I'm hopeful.
Obedient.
I'm Bill, and I'm receptive.
I'm Rhina, and I'm frustrated.
I'm Shelley, and I'm grateful.
I'm Amy, and I'm triggered.
What was your name?
Amy.
And what was the word?
Amy?
Yes.
Triggered.
Triggered.
I'm Neil. I'm activated.
I'm Leslie, and I'm excited.
Great. So maybe you want to hold? Okay.
I'll put
You
it
got
right here.
All right, friends. And I keep looking back, but does that mean you see me? Yes, I can see myself. Hey. So why don't we start with Cheryl?
I figured.
Cheryl, give me a word. How are you feeling?
Always troublesome. Trouble, not troublesome. The eligibility.
Okay.
Voter.
Dawn.
I'm Dawn, and I am hopeful. I couldn't hear what everyone was saying, but
I'm sorry. Well, you are not the only person who is hopeful, Dawn. You'll be pleased to know.
oh, good.
And Robin. Can you hear us, Robin? Robin is not hearing me.
Robin's frozen.
Oh, Robin is frozen. Robin is feeling frozen. Okay, when you're back, we'll get you back. Oh, and Susan, did you just put something?
Hey,
Hey, good to see you.
I'm feeling sad. It has nothing to do with y'all, but I lost a dear friend today.
Oh,
So that's why I'm feeling sad.
sorry.
Thank you.
Linda. Linda Weisskopf. All right, let's go back to Robin. Robin, you were frozen before. Give us a word.
Yeah, I'm unfrozen now. I am feeling scared.
Here, okay. Well, all right, Abby. Oh, that's a different Abby. Yes. Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm feeling hopeful.
And Abby, tell us your last name because we have a lot of Abbies, just so we know which Abby you are.
Goodman?
Goodman, welcome. And Linda, can you unmute, or maybe you're not in a position to do that? Okay. Okay. Yes.
So we're really happy that Kevin
Yes.
Weeks is here, who Sandra and I met at the Ending Mass Incarceration event, and Leslie Anderson? Yeah, okay. At the JCRC, the executive director, is that right? So, a last-minute invitation. Grateful that you're both here.
JCRC is.
Jewish Community Relations Council?
Okay, great.
Really, really pleased to have both of you as guests. And I know that there's not enough time in the evening to take full advantage of all that you bring and all that you know and all that you have to share. So I hope we have plenty of other opportunities. And that's also a good segue into the next part. If everyone, this should have this is a very truncated agenda, just so you kind of see where we're going. We're going to do a little background work. Again, none of this will be enough, but it will be a start. We'll talk a little bit about, we'll do a little bit of definitional work. We will talk about some of the other organizations, Jewish-led and not, and that's certainly where Leslie may say a word or two, and Robin as well. And then we'll talk about the very next program, so that we are looking toward something, and I will describe some of the possible projects that could be available to us. I kind of actually want to road test them a little bit with you all, that we could be doing with that organization. And that organization is Policing Alternatives and Diversion, which some of you all may be familiar with and others not at all. So that's where we're going. So I'll give a little background on myself. I am an attorney. I work currently at a private law firm. I oversee the pro bono work at that law firm. We are in about 19 US cities. So when I say I'm out of town, I'm usually visiting another office. I have the ability to facilitate and support legal pro bono work across the country in a lot of areas. So as Lauren knows, some of that work is in asylum and immigration law, some of it is domestic violence and housing, education, kind of a range of issues. My own personal legal background, I moved to Atlanta in 1998 to work at the Southern Center for Human Rights, where I stayed for about 6 years doing primarily prison litigation in Alabama and Georgia. So that involved local, county, and city jails, state prisons, federal prisons, most of the time seeking what's called injunctive relief, which is change, right? Not looking necessarily for compensation, although sometimes we did for individuals, but rather for an order from a state judge or a federal judge that things had to be different at the prison with respect to violence or overcrowding or provision of mental health care or HIV care. In fact, that was the very first lawsuit I brought as a lawyer ever, but also in Atlanta, since this is where I started, was a class action on behalf of all of the HIV positive people incarcerated at the Fulton County Jail. That was in the late 90s, so some protease inhibitors were still fairly new, and what would happen is people would be incarcerated and almost immediately lose access to their medication regimen with all of the, consequences that can have for someone with HIV. If anyone's interested in that, that is a very long story about Fulton County and DeKalb County. I only put a little bit more time into that because those are the county. I also was involved in a similar lawsuit against the DeKalb County Jail. Those are most of us live in one of those two counties, and so if anyone is interested in some of that history, I'm happy to share it at a different time. So if you fast forward, now in my position at my law firm, I'm able to co-counsel with places like the Southern Center for Human Rights and the Georgia Justice Project and other places, which means getting the attorneys and paralegals and other legal staff from my firm, and actually from other firms as well, to provide free legal assistance in certain kinds of cases. Not everything works for pro bono, but for example, we settled a lawsuit against the Georgia Department of Corrections and how they were managing their most restrictive solitary confinement unit in the state. We settled that a couple of years ago, and we're still working on enforcement, because it's one thing, as you all know, who have worked in policy or law, but also with respect to federal orders. We know this from our civil rights history and desegregation and things, that it's one thing to change the law on the books. It's really important. It's sometimes a whole other thing to see the change on the ground and to sustain it over time. So 25 years later, I'm sitting here with you. I said inspired. I'm a little nervous. I'm a little, not in the jittery nervous, but in the sense that this is indeed a very large issue in its numbers of people affected, and in the entry points for people like us. And when I say us, I want to be very clear. I introduced myself as a lawyer. I am very clear that what we are trying to do is not something that requires any professional credentials. If you've got them, and many of you do, social workers, mental health educators, other things, that's great, and we probably will call upon those things, but that's not what this is about. This is about figuring out how we, as a Jewish community with all of our backgrounds and all of our skills and all of our stories, can bring our energy and our intention to an issue or a range of issues. So I actually asked Abby for a whiteboard, because the next part, it's kind of petite, but we're gonna go with this. This is really good hint, because what I wanted to ask you guys is what you think I'm talking about when I say ending mass incarceration. First of all, let me just be clear about something, and then I'm going to stop talking because I want to hear your thoughts. Ending mass incarceration sounds a little bit like ending domestic violence, ending gun violence, fixing the climate crisis, zero carbon emissions, world peace, right? Ending is the vision, right? Ending is what we are working toward. The idea that we will achieve an end is optimistic, hopeful, to say the least. But if you parse this, and I'm a lawyer, so I do this, we're ending mass, right? So there's a couple ways to read what we're doing, right? Are we ending incarceration? Probably not in our lifetime. Are we ending mass incarceration? Are we seeking an end to this level of criminal justice control over the lives of the people in our city, state, and country? So I kind of just I think it's amazing to call something ending, but I am also aware that we are biting off what we can chew in a very large space. So where does this all begin? Where does this begin?
I was say that that connects with a Jewish value of
Yes.
starting the work, but you never have to finish it, is a Jewish value, and so that's a great way of starting in terms of that.
Yeah. We are joining with, right? We are joining with and doing our part. Okay, I promised I was gonna stop talking. For my birthday a couple weeks ago, my husband and I went to see Iris Dement, which when I've asked, I love this cohort, because everybody, almost everybody is nodding their head. I mention it to my kids, and they're like, not even close. Like, you have to really, okay. She put out a new album this year. Has anybody heard that album? Yes, like January 2023. And a lot of it was inspired by her feelings and her own reactions, really, since Trump was elected president. And she talks about how she would sing some of these songs to herself, and that's how she realized she needed to make another album. These were the ways she gave herself peace. One of the songs is called Working for a World I May Never See. It is a good song. And it's also back to this intention. We are carrying on a tradition, and we are working toward a vision that may not all happen in our lifetimes. Hopefully we will see some positive change, but we are working on a world that we may never see. Leanne.
Well, not to spar against Jewish values.
Okay.
But, what comes to mind for me, so people.
Oh, Mike.
You can't hear on Zoom unless you have. And hopefully this isn't derailing what you're saying, but going to where you're going, is that the Jewish value of to save a life, you have saved the world. And so I think when we talk about incarceration and mass incarceration, it's almost like, for so many years I worked with refugee resettlement, and there are so many refugees around the world, and just less than 1% are resettled here in the United States. But for every one refugee, that is huge. For every one person who was saved from the Holocaust as a child, that is huge. And so I think about the same kind of thing with mass incarceration. Each case that is taken and maybe diverted from going to prison, or someone who's unjustly accused is whatever. But it's one person sometimes at a time where you have to count your successes.
No, that is to me, that's another way of saying or looking at the same. Oh, you want to do that? Leslie will be, and I'm glad you said that too, Leon, because sometimes the numbers can be dehumanizing and overwhelming. Like when they learned that through those fundraising campaigns, it was a lot easier to get people to look at a single starving child, right, and say, this child could eat for $5 a month. What kind of are you? I was gonna, all kinds of words. If you can't spare $5 so this child can eat, it turns out is a lot more effective than there are 3 million people dying in famine. Like, how do you touch it? How do you touch this? And so I think that focusing on the individual life, and if we get to it, that is one of the values listed in this Jewish call to action, is exactly that. Is one of the Jewish values that this whole thing is based upon. So,
Kevin wanted to say something.
Kevin, please.
Yes, I'm glad you are explaining the term ending mass incarceration, being formerly incarcerated. On the inside, when it's thrown around, oh, there are people outside, there are community members outside that are fighting to end mass incarceration. We think, oh, we can really get out early. That's why I'm thankful to have the clear understanding of what this community means when they talk about end mass incarceration, because some will think, oh, they're about to let out a bunch of violent offenders. Ooh. So I'm thankful for the clarity, because I can take this with the individuals that I'm still in communication with on the inside, that I know that will spread the word that no, on the outside, ending mass incarceration means stopping those young people from coming in so that we won't have to try to protect them from being eaten up by a gang. That's another story, but but I'm glad I'm here for that clarification.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah. And that
Tamara,
really does.
can I say something?
Yes, Robin.
Okay, hey. So just my view of mass incarceration is that for each individual who commits an offense, and there's sort of a spectrum of offenses, many of those people don't need to go to prison in order to make our community a safer place. In fact, often if we work to give people support to help them stabilize and become contributing members of society, we are all safer. But right now, there's a lot of profit that's generated from putting people in prison. There's racism, which is behind imprisoning people rather than looking at the underlying issues for them and allowing people who are not threats to society to be in society. So when I think of mass incarceration, I think of using jail and prison, to cage people who are not threats to society. Often because of racism, and often because, particularly in jail situations where they simply can't make bond because they don't have money.
All right, so we've sort of talked about, if you look back at this, and this is really, again, this is a little bit cheating, which is really, really good because we don't have a lot of time. This, to me, the purpose of this, probably this image, is to talk about the numbers and to show the staggering numbers. But it also, what I was going to have us do was talk about what we're talking about, because Kevin, you're absolutely right, that part of what we're talking about is keeping people out, like from ever coming in, right? So you might call that front end, right? That's people, all of us, the rest of us are out here. We live, most of us, right, out here.
Or on the other back end.
Well, right, so some of us live, right, we've come out.
I mean, in the sense of like, even if you're talking about you're renting a house, but you have on there, have you ever been incarcerated?
Right.
So
we'll
then
get
you're on
there.
the back end.
Right. So we'll get there. So, but you're absolutely right that the people who live outside of prisons either have never been or have been and have come out and are forever affected by that, right? Because they have to deal with the consequences of a criminal record. And they have to deal with the trauma and the mental health and all of the pieces, all of the things that they carry with them from that incarceration. So when you talk about ending, or you talk about trying to reduce mass incarceration and criminalization, and who wants to take a stab at defining what criminalization means in this context? Ending criminalization.
Putting someone in jail for a minor mistake.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, I think that it's putting someone in jail because of the circumstances that led them into this life.
So give us an example.
Well, perhaps you were born premature and your brain didn't form fully, and then you went to special ed, and then you got punished every day, and so you dropped out of school. And then you couldn't get a job, and then you decided that you would turn to selling marijuana because that's what you could do. And it all started with the fact that you didn't get the proper medical care, and the social determinants of your health led you to a life of inability to achieve where we all supposedly are. Does that
Okay,
make
I think that's
sense?
great.
I
Yes.
mean, it's criminalization of poverty and loss.
Yeah. Rabbi
And it's
Mike?
real.
Yeah.
This is a real thing that
Oh, yeah.
happens every single day.
Right. And you see it on the front end. Yep.
So there was a recent example. So Memphis, which is the town that had the Scorpion police unit, one of these special units, and that's what killed Tyree Nichols. There was a proposal in a certain part of the town to arrest kids who were playing their music too loud or dressed inappropriately, or who were dancing in the street, which is like, it's laughable, except we know what kids they're talking about, right? We know what part of downtown and which kids, and that's the criminal, it's clearly the criminalization of black kids. Right. And for Jews, we know about this from Europe, right? Where whatever the Jews are doing is problematic, and because it's problematic, we've got to keep an eye on them. And we saw what happened in Europe with, with the ultimate expression of criminalizing an ethnicity, right? And that comparison's always tricky. Some people don't like it, but that's the dehumanization that goes with goes along with the criminalization and allows for the criminalization.
Carolyn.
What brings me here is the uneven application of the law based either on money or the lack of it, race, and the things that differentiate us as people when really we're not that different from each other. And there's the story about fearing the unknown. Once you get to know somebody, and there was a song about that, I don't remember how it went, but if you know somebody, you're not going to fear them. And it's much easier to talk about the other, the unknown, but we're really not the other.
So these are such great answers that are all somewhat different, right? So I think it's fair to say that most of the time when people in this kind of who are working on this are talking about criminalization, they are talking, remember that things aren't a crime until there's a law that says they're a crime, right? How do you decriminalize marijuana? Well, you say it's not a crime anymore. And all of a sudden, right, something that yesterday put hundreds of thousands of largely black men and women, people in jail, is something that's a legitimate business that's now gonna be a multi-billion-dollar business, right? So when you criminalize, when you make behavior that was otherwise not a crime, you've criminalized the behavior and you've criminalized the person, right? So people talk a lot about the criminalization of poverty or the criminalization of homelessness, right? If you're sleeping on a bench because you have nowhere else to sleep, and then the city passes an ordinance that says, well, we don't want to see people sleeping on benches, so we're gonna make it a crime to sleep on a bench. No urban camping, right? Or loiter. We're not gonna have public bathrooms, but public urination. We're gonna call that a crime, and we're gonna put a fine to it, and we might put jail time with it. And if you don't show up for court, you're gonna get a failure to appear. So the next time you're stopped for something like loitering, you now have a failure to appear, and a sleeping, an urban camping, and a public urination. And you build a record, and eventually, many of those people end up in the prison system, or at least in the jail system. Leslie.
So I also just wanted to point out that when I think about criminalization and being in the criminalization of the system, it's not just about the incarceration, but about the entire system. So sometimes you can go into jail or into prison, and then even when you come out, you've got these crazy long sentences that keep you in the parole and probation spaces, that keep you connected and keep you kind of tethered to this constant threat hanging over you. And so I think that also, as well as the just hundreds of collateral consequences that arise as a result of having a record. Right. So I think it just kind of spreads out like water on a table. It just keeps going and going and going.
So you see, Leslie, you're talking about, we've barely gotten past the front end, right? But let's just very quickly, right? You do something, police officer responds, you get arrested, you have a public defender, or you hire your own defense lawyer. We can talk all about the issues around bail, who ends up staying in jail while they're waiting for their hearing, how long it's taking because of the backlog in the courts caused by COVID, why we're transferring 600 people from the Fulton County Jail to another jail, and why people are dying in their jail cell because of lice in our community, but you're prosecuted, you're sentenced, you may be sentenced to straight probation, just go right to that status of living in the community, but having all of these restrictions, maybe having an ankle monitor, having to report, usually having to pay a private company some amount of monthly money to do, usually not much, if anything, to support you, other than to hold you accountable for paying that money on time every month, which of course, if you have money, is easier than if you don't. Or you serve time, you go to prison, you might have a probationary sentence built into your sentence. I'm doing a little bit of just, some of this is really basic for some people are like, I have no idea what the difference between probation and parole is, and that's totally fine. So probation is built into your sentence. It is this part of the sentence. You have 10 years to serve, followed by 5 years of probation. It's probably not a typical sentence, right? So you know that you're gonna serve some of your time out in the community with these probationary requirements during that time. Some of those requirements are financial. And this is for those of you who do election work, right? If you are in Georgia, when you get out of prison, you are automatically entitled to re-register. Some states you have to apply. Here you have to apply to register, you have to register like anyone else, but you don't have to prove your worth again. If you're on probation or parole, or you have some outstanding fees related that were part of your sentence, you cannot vote until you have paid all your fees. You can vote on once you are, well, sorry, you're right. Once you're off paper, you can vote, but not if you've got fees that were part of your sentence. It's very confusing. If you have restitution, or if you have, some fees count and some fees don't. We can do a deeper dive into probation and parole, but there is a connection there to some of the democracy work and voting work that we do as a community there as well. That's part of that collateral consequence and part of the purposeful confusion about it all.
Something just, what came to mind was City of Tucker.
Yeah.
They were the one that said no urban camping,
right.
Okay? And I don't know how many Tucker residents really knew that, they kind of slid it under the radars. Yeah. Nobody said anything. But they were also doing something about, they wanted to have like their community or their bars, okay? Now, I don't know what the law is where you can't drink, you have a bottle in a paper bag. No open containers, right? You're gonna be arrested. So that's usually, when you think about it, like the homeless person, the person who's unhoused with a bottle in a bag. But Tucker was looking at how to create a law so that you can have open containers in their like beer district kind of thing. Yeah. So the reason I just say that is because sometimes when we talk about mass incarceration and we do look at this wide swath of things, okay? There's so many people, there are so many people in this that are like stupidly arrested. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. So if any one of us was arrested for an open container law, we'd probably be out the very next hour, right? And we'd probably be in the beer drinking district where it's okay because of COVID. But that same community wants to criminalize. Right. So I just feel like this is part of that conversation, that if people are thinking, and probably not in this circle, but once you walk out, who are these people we're getting out of jail? It's because the frat boys over there are drinking outside, but that homeless person gets arrested. And there are so many numbers that are these petty, petty crimes where people are now sitting and languishing in a cell because of that. So.
Yeah, that's right. And were you going to say something, Leslie?
I was. So all I was going to say is that that you're right. An hour is not nearly enough time, and I think that. As you guys lean into this work, it would behoove you to kind of to break it down into chunks to think about. And I think when you're talking about pre-arrest diversion, I think you're starting at that front end. Yeah. Because it is an elephant that is huge, and you can't get your hands around the whole thing. So you kind of have to pick what's the area that you're going to work on, because it is just so much. But the inequality and the and the abuse of government power, for lack of, I don't know how I'll say it, I think is pervasive across the system, you know, and I think that that is something that is always going to be frustrating for those of us who feel very strongly about wanting to have accountability. But I think that that's going to be an important part of it.
Yes, I want to touch on the probation and
please.
and the parole thing. This is how Georgia's system, how they sentence. They call it. They'll say they'll give you 12 do 5. They call that a split.
Right.
When you receive a 12-year sentence, you have 12 years, but they split it and you do 5 in the system. Now, here's the trick. The 7 is on probation, what she was just talking about. But you get paroled in 3 years on the 5. So now you have a parole sentence to do on the outside, and now you have a probation sentence to do because now your probation officer then got whiff that you're out. So you have 2 fees that you have to pay.
I just want to say, Kevin, so I learned this today from, I didn't give you this in the room, but I learned this today from my friend, Mr. Amar.
Yeah.
Look at this.
Yeah.
So we're way at the top here. And all that red is probation.
Yeah.
Like what you're saying, the Georgia probation system is like massively larger than any of the other states.
Yeah.
And if you're on like 10, 15 years of probation, all you have to do is fail to show up for your probation officer, and you're back in prison, you're back in jail,
And,
right?
And to
Traffic stop, you know.
Detail with you, Rabbi Mike. This is now the parole officer. They drive around. They do not have remote. No, they have remote sites. It's their cars, and they drive around. You don't go to the office anymore. They drive around and where are you? I'm at some. Okay, I'm getting ready to drive past your job. You better be there. This is how they track, and they can track more and get more money because people got Cash App, they have this, they have that. Let me see your phone. So there are a lot of things, collateral consequences and discretionary disqualification is something that I'm fighting big on because I experienced that, but that's another topic.
Yeah, no, and all these topics, and Leslie, you're right, and you know, our vision, and I should acknowledge that all of this came out of the CBH retreat where we did a session on the Jewish call to action, and all of you have a copy of that document. It's the fairly small font, but hopefully you can read it, and if not, it's easy to find online. Where, Leslie, were you part of developing that document? You weren't part of that. You're
the JCPA?
You're a signatory.
Yes, so we actually, so JCRCs are part of JCPA, which is the Jewish Council of Public Affairs. And so I started with them in 18, so it was right as this came out. But it is something that we've been using since 18 as a way to try to move into the space and to talk to our Jewish community about how to engage on this work because we feel it's so important.
So I had the fortune of going to a program at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the Temple co-hosted it last fall, called, it's been going on for many years, and who was I talking about who had been at it? Robin, many years ago, I think. It was started by Reverend Warnock, Senator Warnock, before he was a senator. And it's a multi-faith initiative for ending mass incarceration, and it's a national movement. It's got quite a bit, right, and it's part of what you all met each other at, exactly. And they piloted that Changing the Narrative workshop at the...
So I actually serve on that steering committee for it's the multi-faith initiative to end mass incarceration. It was started in, I guess, technically 16, 17. We had our first conference in 19. This was our second one. But I sit on the Georgia steering committee for that.
That's
for
great.
That reason.
So we have a
narrative change is one of them.
Do we need help just one? Can we start with one?
Person?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are now at 7:49, and you need to probably tear up my little agenda because we didn't really get close. So when you have an elephant that you're trying to eat, it can be a little overwhelming with a fork and knife to begin. And so I want to take us first to kind of acknowledge Leslie. This is a very basic. Lots of issues. We gotta focus. We gotta choose something, right? We gotta start somewhere. And even as we are starting somewhere, we have so much to learn. But the idea is that we don't have to spend 3 years learning to start acting. We can begin, we can have a session on understanding probation and parole in Georgia. We can have a session on solitary confinement, what we need to know, what we need to understand, the history of the prison. We could have a session about the privatization of prisons and law enforcement functions and how that affects civil rights and how that piece fits into our over-reliance on prisons in the system instead of using our money in other and better ways. We can be really thinking about and prioritize some of those issues that we want to learn and know more about. And I'm stealing this, copyrighted by Rabbi Mike, this three-legged stool or whatever, spider, tick, or whatever that is, that shows the sort of how do we engage, right? And certainly there are other words that we could use and subcategories, and I get really bogged down. But at the end of the day, education, right? Learning, like from Kevin and from people who are directly affected by this system and from organizations that work with people. Direct service, which is the more traditional, nice, yeah, okay. Direct service, which I spoke with Amy Price, and I don't think she was able to join us, but Repair the World is very focused on, are there things that we could provide someone who's the day after they get out of prison that they're gonna need? Or Georgia Justice Project I was sharing with Repair the World has a project where every fall they put together a backpack full of supplies for children of people who are incarcerated. So ways that you can tangibly and with your hands help people who are struggling in this space. It can also include, and I know the Temple does some of this, criminal record clearing, helping people get driver's licenses, doing things that are a little bit more, get closer to the legal end, but are imminently trainable and do not require a JD to do 90% of the work. So, and Georgia Justice Project, where Doug Amar, Rabbi Mike keeps talking about Doug, has really worked hard to create some of those ways in for lawyers and legal professionals, but also for other people who want to be helpful, they want to learn, and they want to be directly helpful to individual people. And then there's this word, which means about 1 million things, advocacy. It can mean everything from advocating for parole for an individual human being who has a very strong case and all the discretionary factors, advocating for that person, advocating for a change in the way the prison manages solitary confinement. You could challenge solitary confinement with a federal lawsuit. You can also write letters, show up at legislative committee hearings, write to the Department of Corrections, do some research and show that our system for solitary confinement is actually, on scales of badness, really, really, really bad. And that we don't want to be the state with the very worst, most dehumanizing prison system. Advocacy, though, and I'm going to go straight here now because of our time. So on May 17th, and I believe it's on the calendar, but I still need to share a blurb with the congregation. May 17th in the evening, it's a Thursday at 7, Clara Totenberg Green, who's the community engagement manager at Policing Alternatives and Diversion, is going to come speak to us. So is Ruby Beth Budicant, who is the daughter of, yes, our very beloved Beth Ann, who is on their community ambassador team. I encourage you to, I had actually pulled it up and was going to talk through the history of PAD, but you can go to their website, look up Policing Alternatives and Diversion Atlanta. They have a very nice history that starts in about 2013. This was an initiative started primarily by trans and queer women of color, people of color, looking at the over-reliance on arrest and incarceration, particularly of sex workers. I think that was the start. So it was really looking at how people were kind of churning through the local jails and into the street and back again. Yeah.
There was also agreement that in the area, there's also been some agreement that I hope will endorse, that Kevin will do some education for our entire congregation at some evening. And we're just looking for a date for that. The rabbi and I and our executive director are currently looking for that.
You think I'm going to say no to that smile?
I mean.
So I'm not, you know.
Right.
So exactly, we don't have to wait to do that, right? Like, this is it. We don't have to, let's go, right? Like, Kevin has things to share, other people have things to share, many people in this room, and Robin, I'm barely even gonna get to you, but are already deeply involved in this work in some way and have great connections. I do, if you're willing to say a word, Robin, about your connection and the work of Necessary Trouble, because I know a lot of people at our congregation are beginning to work in that space as well, just so that I don't not get to you.
Thanks. Okay, so Necessary Trouble is an indivisible group. If you guys don't know what indivisible is, you can look it up online just because we're short on time. But basically, it's out of Decatur, and we do grassroots work that address different areas of need, a lot around elections. The committee that I lead is on criminal justice reform. And part of what I love about this group is, I think like Beit Havarim, people aren't in it for name recognition or power. They're really in it to get things done. I went to the Ending Mass Incarceration conference that Tamara just referenced a few years ago and found myself completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem. And so when I took on the chair role with Necessary Trouble, it felt really important to me to pick very narrowly defined projects that we could sort of wrap our hands around and move the ball from here to here. I know Sandra Menace is there, and she was on the last project that we did, where we actually got a law passed by the state of Georgia called the Co-Responder Bill, where for 911 calls coming out of mental health and substance abuse, we've set up a structure where police will go out with mental health providers to try to work towards stabilization and non-incarceration. Anyway, and that's now in the process of implementation. So picking projects like that, and I mean, that one was a big one, but we got it done. So Necessary Trouble, I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of philosophy with Beit Havarim. And so one thing Tamara and I have talked about is, sort of collaborating where it's appropriate and letting each other know about our projects. And the more people there are doing this work and together, I think the more effective.
Robin, do you have anything on the books that you're anticipating?
Not right now. Right now, actually, I'm working with PAD, like you were talking about, and that's not through Necessary Trouble. We finished the Co-Responder project, and I have not started a new one. So if there's something that Beit Havarim is doing, it's certainly something that I would spread over to Necessary Trouble, and we could talk about getting involved with y'all.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, so we're looking at ways to be mutually reinforcing. And the same is true with Leslie and her work and the work at the temple. And again, exactly, Robin, this isn't about us branding this as our, we do want to have a sense of pride and a sense of community and a sense of connection around it. But we also want to, build power where we can, and when that means collaboration, than it should be. So one of the goals in inviting PAD to come talk with us is for us collectively as CBH to begin building relationships with people in the community who have been there doing the work and knowing the leaders and getting things done and building some trust there. And so that when things do emerge, whether it's at the city council or county commission or state legislature or whatever, people know they can call out to us and know where we're coming from and that we have a clue what we're talking about and what we're doing and what our values are. And so let me just in the interest of kind of next steps, May 17th, and hopefully we'll hear from Kevin before then, but if not, very, very soon, Ruby Beth and Clara, who happens to be Jewish and looking for a community, and yes, her last name is Totenberg, and yes, she's a Totenberg, yes, you know. They're very excited to come talk with us. Here are some ways, and I hope some of these are interesting to you. So like I said at the beginning, I'm kind of wanting to do a temperature check, and if the people on Zoom want to do the little raise hand function, if you know how to do that. If not, just put in the chat, yay or nay or something. Okay, so idea number 1. Host a meet and greet with PAD in your community. How many of you live in the city of Atlanta? Oh, not so many. Okay, well, so we would probably want to figure out who our city, this PAD is very much affiliated and associated now with the city of Atlanta. So we would want to build around the people, probably if we were to do this, really think about neighborhoods where we exist. Okay, she says, we are always eager to meet more Atlanta community members and share. Similar to a meet and greet you might host for a politician running for office. A meet and greet could be neighborhood focused or include anyone in your network. So it's really learning enough about PAD to host a presentation and invite everyone in your community that you know. The second, and some of you remember the organization, or maybe you're still involved with Standing Up for Racial Justice, Surge? Yeah. So this was a largely white-led organization that was mobilized around sort of how do white people engage in this work in a way that is effective and cognizant of who we are, and leveraging aspects of our privilege. So we can talk more. We're going to have a whole session on that too. So white folks, no, we wouldn't do it with Surge, although we could, but she was saying that's the model. We actually do some canvassing. So PAD knows where the communities are, where they're getting the most calls, in communities where people are still calling the police, which means there's not a good enough awareness. I suspect that some of those communities are white communities, is what she was basically saying. And we would have a point where we meet. We do some education like you would if you were going around educating for a political candidate. You might have some materials. You're not asking for money. You're saying, and I should back up, PAD has a phone line. This is important. PAD has a phone line, 311. That is a number that you would call instead of 911 if you see somebody who is not presenting a danger, but some of the crimes or offenses we were talking about before, that indicates that the person, him or herself or themselves, is in distress, needs help, is having a mental health crisis, is unhoused, and is maybe doing something erratic where they might end up hurting themselves if they don't get some kind of support or help, but they are not posing an active safety risk to anyone.
So we would go through a neighborhood and tell the people about PADS.
We would say, call 311. Do you understand what 311 is? People don't. They've done what they can. They aren't that big of an organization. People are not calling. They're calling 311 in some numbers. They want more people to know. So it is City of Atlanta only right now. Yeah. Well, and I think I think a co-responder session would be great too, because the legislation Robin just described is a statewide bill about co-response when it's a mental health issue. So that might be that might be the thing. Yes, and why don't we go one, or will you have the mic? So start there and then there.
Okay. If you see something and you call or encourage someone to call 311, who would the respondent be, and what would follow your call?
So we will learn a lot more about that on May 17th, exactly what happens. But they have a team, and if you go on their website, you'll see the responders. They are social worker trained individuals who know how to assess and triage what's going on, and to make a decision that actually we do need. I mean, this is a police call, and we need to engage law enforcement. But the vast majority of the time, they are assessing and then actually going out and helping the person either find shelter or find help. But that is the exact kind of question that I want PAD to answer and more directly. On May
That's
17th.
PAAD?
It's PAD.
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 Police alternatives and diversion.
Right. Oh, yes.
Hi. My daughter is a social worker working there.
Yes.
And my understanding was that it's Fulton County.
Oh, is it Fulton County?
Not just Atlanta.
Oh.
However, as of now,
I didn't know.
it's just during the day, during the week.
Yeah. Right.
That's correct.
It's part of a pilot. Robin, and I know, Robin, you have done some work with them. Do you have more to add on that?
Yeah, no, it is correct that it's during the day, during the week. And in terms of city and Fulton County, Fulton County has been part of the initiative to create PAD.
Right.
Most of the funding is coming from the city, but the diversion center will open, and I believe that will be open for Atlanta and Fulton County probably next summer.
Yeah.
So Fulton County is in the mix.
So just really quickly, because I know we're at time, the diversion center is also a really potentially exciting thing for us to understand and know about. It's using a part of the city jail downtown as a place where people can actually receive some of these services that we're talking about that they need instead of jail. So this is very much, and we don't have the little spectrum, a front-end initiative that is built on the faith that there are a lot of people that never need to enter a jail, never need to be arrested, never need to have a criminal record, never need to go to jail, never need to go to prison. And that is, in saying that is not saying we're not interested in the people in prison, right? That's not saying that we don't care how they are treated or what happens when they get out. What it's saying is this is a place to start where there is some momentum in our community, where there are some connections in our congregation, and where we could build some relationships and bring our energy and our commitment and grow. Yeah. Carolyn.
The word I think of is intervention.
Right. People who need an intervention. That is often the case. The last piece she said, and this really goes to the direct service piece, which might be where some of you and others in our congregation are most comfortable initially, is they are always in need of non-perishable food items, personal hygiene items. We could host a drive. We could do that in connection with a meeting at one of our homes where we're educating communities. It doesn't have to be our home. It could be a community center. But we could, together with that kind of canvassing or education drive or meeting at our home with our own friends and community members, we could also ask people to bring non-perishable food, hygiene items.
Where does that go to?
That goes directly to people that they pick, I mean, Fulton County gives them, what, $250,000 for some of the kind of, it really goes to people they interact with for whom that is an immediate need.
I spelled hygiene right.
Yay.
All right. Well, then I think that means that we're done. No, I'm kidding. So we didn't even scratch the surface. I think we hit a few notes. Leanne definitely wants to say something. Go ahead, Leanne.
Well, the Quakers a while ago put out a brochure about what is suspicious behavior. okay? And so this doesn't have 311 on it, but I would say maybe a first step could be to get some of those brochures or to get a PDF of the brochures, copy them, put them out at high holidays, give them to all of our own people. Because we are probably some of those people, I myself, who check myself, right? Is that suspicious behavior, or is that just black man walking down the street?
All right, did you write that down?
I will help get that.
Okay,
I will help
okay.
get that. The other thing is maybe, well, there's a case in Gwinnett County of a man who has spent 20 years in jail for, in his case, murdering his 3-month-old because they said it was shaken baby syndrome. But there is evidence to the contrary. So Southern Poverty Law Center is working with this case, and we're about to have a conversation with them. And if there's some advocacy in that direction, maybe that can go under one of the advocacy pieces. That I should have probably just one-on-one you with it. But those kinds of things, I think, are like, we could send it out to the listserv, get people on board quite quickly that way. But I do think that the brochure at the high holidays, I have volunteered. If anybody wants to work with me, let me know.
And I think that's a really critical piece of what Pat is trying to communicate. Like, I think it's a really fair question to ask, like, so like, what are you talking about? Like, what is in that bucket of things that is patable, right? Like, they probably have stats, right? That of the calls that they've made and what the behavior was that caused the person to feel like they needed help. But even just the reason, right.
It's really like learning ourselves.
Right.
And once you're made aware of it, and you can go, oh, let me see, yeah, you're right.
But it's not, so I just want to, it's sometimes the motivation is I'm worried about that person, right? So I think a lot of these cases are like, that person I'm feeling like they're gonna get, right. And so I don't want to call the police, but I don't feel like I can personally intervene for whatever reason, but I gotta do something. And so this also creates an avenue for that something that doesn't involve calling the police, where that person might actually get the help that they need. And so there's also that opportunity in that discernment of, is this a police call or is this a 311 call, of the racial and other kinds of issues, yeah. Neil, you all okay? I know, Abby, I just want to be conscious of.
We're not going till 9.
I just, there's one topic, and I know a lot of this seems like the bottom of the curve type of like attacking the issue at a very personal level. And I'm wondering if you wanted to go higher up in the food chain, and I know this has probably been done, but looking at, I hope I can say this, the commoditization of incarceration, and like even like some of the contracts that are signed.
Private probation, private prison, private.
Yeah, and even like it's at a very local level actually, DeKalb County, Fulton County, and there's a lot of contracts that come in front of our commissioners that are approved and not approved, and it's the money train. And if you look at the money train, I've never felt so threatened when I questioned a money train once. So I understand that's not the easiest thing to do.
Well, just to respond to that, I should have said, one of the things, in addition to these things that we could do, fairly soon, is Clara said if CBH showed up at every quarterly budget meeting of Fulton County, that in itself would be huge. Show up educated with a thing or two to say about why is there $10 million over here, but you're talking about cutting $200,000 to pad when, really having the talking points, knowing the budget, knowing the money, and maybe in that process saying, so we're paying the private misdemeanor probation company X number of dollars a year, and you're struggling to approve this. So that's a way of saying yes, and I should have said, that we did go to a budget meeting. I look at Rabbi Mike spoke, and several people went. Yeah, that's right. Bill was there, a few other people were there, and it was good, and it made a difference, and people noticed. That's another piece, that if that's the piece that really drives you, there's a way to do that even within PAD. We don't have to always do PAD. I just want us to have a place to start and people to start with.
So I was just going to jump in and say, too, that what you guys are doing here is absolutely fabulous, and it's one of the things that has driven me and my desire to see this issue become important, because it's about the humanizing people that we have a tendency to make invisible in our community. You know, addicts, people who have mental health issues, people who get put into jails and prisons, homeless, they're invisible in our society, and so we just hide them away and then forget they're people and literally let them die and be eaten to death by bugs. Or we forget about them for 2 days and find them dead. Like, it's ridiculous. So I think when we talk about narrative change and being out there and rehumanizing that we're all part of this. We too often say, oh, this isn't a Jewish issue, or it's not my backyard. But it is, because it affects all of us and it's our entire society. And lastly, I just want to say you're part of a larger network. For any of those issues that come up for you, you do have to start somewhere. But there's lots of other groups doing different types of work, and we can plug you in all sorts of different places, and I would love to help with you. Anybody at any time, feel free to call me, and I'll be glad to help do that.
So I see Bill, but I just want to piggyback off of that meeting that you talked about, yeah, which was, and the only reason I know that Fulton County is involved with PAD was because it was the county,
right.
It was the county commissioners who were meeting, right, and the PAD funding was being threatened because PAD had done advocacy work against the police training center.
It was actually against the jail becoming a jail again.
Oh, I thought was it?
I don't think so.
No?
I don't think that,
Okay.
Anyway, they have done that too, but yeah.
So the commissioners were talking about that there had been musings about let's cut the funding. And so we show up, I've got it. I think, was I wearing a towel? I don't know. I was showing up as a rabbi. We had Jews there. We had somebody in a priest's collar, a minister's collar, right? And suddenly Marvin Arrington, who's my commissioner, is like, nobody's talking about cutting this funding except y'all, right? Which is, as far as I could tell, not true, but it's the power, and I'm going to keep saying this until you can say it back to me. When Jews show up as Jews, people pay attention. When religious people show up as religious people, people pay attention. There was attention focused, and here we were. What are these 6 Jews doing there, right? Do they have kids in the criminal justice system? People who, maybe we do, right? But that's the advocacy stuff. If you don't like, and I promise I'll stop talking, if you don't like the fact that in your city, somebody's body was consumed by bed bugs in the jail, right? You talk to your friends at PAD, you talk to your friends at the Georgia Justice Project, and you say, hey, who's our local commissioner? Who's our city council person if you live within the city of Atlanta? And you take 3-4 Jews and you make an appointment with them and you go to their office. What are the Jews here for?
What are the Jews here for?
The Jews are here to talk about Israel. No, they're not here to talk about Israel. They're here to talk about the jail. People will pay attention. So they're like, wow. And then you make a follow-up. So that's where I've just seen the power of advocacy, and I just want to make another pitch for that. We saw it with Marvin Arrington and that county commissioners group.
All of the legislators, the Georgia legislators, now that the session is over, they are all holding town halls. So Imani Barnes is holding a town hall in Tucker in another couple of weeks. I mean, they're all, now that the session is over, they're ready to hear from their constituents.
Now's the time to do the work.
Kevin, let's let you have the last word. Oh, Bill hasn't had his last. No, I want to hear Bill. Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off.
Well, this may take us in a different direction, so it may not be. But there is an intersection between our security of this building, the people that have sometimes wandered back here, and what do we do when that happens? And this question of what is suspicious behavior. So we're in this from different ends, and we've got police that stand out there and guard us, and we've got talking about Cop City down the, I mean, we have this, and everybody in the city probably has this ambiguous relationship. So I just want to point, we need to have some discussion about how does that, how do those intersect?
I'll just really quickly, Kevin, I'll give you the very last word, or maybe Rabbi will actually have the very, very last word with a prayer. But at the conference that we're talking about at Ebenezer, there was a panel at lunch with 3 women rabbis. I shouldn't have to say women. It was 3 rabbis. They happen to be women. They were phenomenal. It was so good. And this was a majority not Jewish audience. It was, that was our program. I know that was your program, but of course, and I might not be the only one. I got a little nervous, right? Like the Jews are talking in a very Christian, in a church with the, and it's like, they get just, and they talked. They were from different congregations all over the country, and they sang "O Ziva Zimrat Yah," and the person next to me was like, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever. What is that? What was that?" It was like, "Oh, you should come to chant." Anyway, but one of the rabbis said they took up this issue about police outside of their congregation and said, we've got to really examine this internally. And it was a very, you think Israel's a difficult issue? The presence of law enforcement and security outside of Jewish events and what it says and does and means for us, why we feel we need it, and who it might exclude or make feel uncomfortable about being in the environment is a really difficult issue. It's one that some synagogues have taken up, and some synagogues have opted on the side of not having police against the desires of some. And I'm not suggesting that that's the next place we go, but I do think I really appreciate you calling out that this isn't always a comfortable space, and that's part of it. That's part of it. Kevin.
This, I will say, being invited by Janice, Sandra, this, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't. And when I got dropped off, I was like, where am I? Is this it? Then I seen the sign on by the door, by the tree. I said, yeah, this it. So I said, well, maybe this is a smaller building than it's across the street. So I walked down a block, and I'm like, okay, it's a black man walking up and down the street. So even still, me dressed like this, I still have that percent of I can be a target still. So I'm looking around, and I said, let me stand on a corner. I can be seen on the corner. And in my mind, I'm like, if anyone's watching me, they'll watch I haven't went anywhere. I didn't go anywhere. But when I seen the 2 women walking, I said, okay, let me walk ahead of them, and maybe I'm in the right direction. And coming up, I was in the right direction, and I turned around, hello, how you doing? And coming in, I felt warm. I didn't feel any type of rejecting spirits or anything. Like I didn't belong here, because I came here for a purpose. My purpose was not to share what I went through, but for the whole time of waiting to come to this meeting, I really wanted to know, how do the Jewish community really see us? Not so much in color, but a convicted felon, those that are incarcerated. I'm emotional because I never knew that you all cared. I never knew. I have a few friends that are incarcerated, and I stay in contact with them. And I was excited to tell them that I was going to a Jewish synagogue. And they hit me back, and they was like, what? And I never knew. I never knew. I had no idea. Growing up, hearing about the Holy Cause, I am an Anne Frank member with PEN America. I know the stories, heard the stories, don't know them, heard the stories. And I am honored. I am honored. I'm with you all. I'm here. I'm honored to be here. And I'm coming back.
Excellent. Yes, you are.
And I'm coming back because I do have something to share with this community that I do believe that will help. You all understand the side of a black man growing up in Philadelphia on welfare, being told that he's going to be just like his father who went into incarceration, molested by family members, babysitters, and being pushed through school, being pushed just to not to see your face again. And I'm not going to blame it all on the system. I can't, because God gave me free will to make my own decisions. I will say that there's some community issues that helped, but I made the decisions that I made. And when men and women accept the fact that they made the decision that caused them to be in the situation that they're in, that is the start of the change. That's the start. So getting these young men and women, young adults, to get them to understand that they are the ones that decide. They're deciding factors. They're the causation. Their thoughts, their actions is the causation. And that's what I'm going to bring to this congregation, an understanding from my perspective, and you all sharing me your all's perspective and you all's history will help us build this community so that we can go and reach out into the community, because I see the need that y'all want to. And I couldn't understand why she kept telling me, we're afraid. I don't understand. Now, I'm just sitting here saying to myself, whoa, I could really die right now because of where I am. But thank you for the grace of God, I did not have that fear, because I'm protected by a host of angels. I'm protected. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. That's great. Emma, you want to close us out?
Okay, so there's a few thoughts. So thank you so much, Kevin. As always, every time I hear you speak, I'm moved. Yeah, so we wouldn't. All right, I'm gonna try and be. We said 9 o'clock. I just want that to be said, even though. Yeah, but we're gonna end. We're not gonna end at 9, right? It did. It said it on the website, 9 o'clock. Okay, so I'm gonna take. Yeah, you're good. Your agenda was for, but this Jewish version is an hour. It means an hour and a half, right? No. I'm ending things sooner, right? So, sometimes our job is to take responsibility for our actions, like you're saying. But what we learned from, you go back to the Israelites in Egypt experience all the way through Jews in Europe experience, is that sometimes you're not set up to make a good decision by the society that wants to pigeonhole you as a certain kind of person, right? And so that's our job, right? And our jobs are not always the same, right? So our job is to say, what do we know from our text and our history about the dehumanization of people? And so that's, the beautiful work that I'm so glad that you brought, that you continue to bring. So I want to put this in context of the bigger CBH effort. So we're now trying to develop different teams that work on social justice issues. Welcome to the Ending Mass Incarceration team. You are now officially a part of it, right? 20-ish people, yeah? And if you're not comfortable making an appointment to talk to your county commissioner, you do have the food and hygiene drive, or you do have the education, right? The good news is if you've got a big enough group, different people can do different things, right? But now we'll keep showing up. This isn't going to, 400 years of dehumanization isn't going to be ended by one synagogue and one meeting, right? So, I always like to invite people to look at each other in the eye. So find somebody to look at and say, I'm going to keep coming back to this work.
Carolyn's going to keep coming back.
Good.
Who's going to keep coming back?
Yeah. Good. Can you say something? Can she say something?
Yeah, we
Can
got
Carolyn
half
say
an
something?
hour.
And then I am gonna finish.
Physically, there's not a whole lot that I can do at this point. However, when there's anything like joining a group that's going to whatever meeting or whatever, if somebody will help me with the transportation, I will go, because I believe live body count makes a big difference. And I have marched and I have done many of those things. Now I've kind of sat back because I have to. But when I don't have to, I want to make good trouble.
Good trouble, necessary trouble. For anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak, since we do have a minute, I just wonder
you want
if
to do that, and then I'll finish?
if there's anyone on the Zoom or anyone in the room, Zoom or room here, who's had something that they've kind of wanted to say and just hasn't spoken. I'd like to. Lauren.
Madam President.
Hi, in my role as president, I just want to take a minute and thank Tamara and Mike and our representative from the Jewish Federation, and Kevin, and you as well, and also Abby. I want to thank Abby for being here. And this is why we're part of CBH, is because change happens, and it is a blessing to be here. And thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you for your support, Lauren.
Okay, I'm going to say real quickly about the police here in front of our building.
Yeah.
So I've gotten to know them, and I've asked that we name them when we have services. And so, I know Detective Lamb and Officer Nicole and Lieutenant Jason, Lieutenant Nicole, Lieutenant Jason, and I get to talk with them. And it's tricky because Jews, if you're a white Jew, then you've got the benefit of whiteness, but then, there's Nazis and there's the Jew haters that we see, their flyers pop up, and the attacks on synagogues. They just started the trial at the Pittsburgh attack. So we're in a tricky position there. I'm glad to know those folks. I'm glad to know that almost all of the officers in front of our building are African American. And I also want to remind us that they don't show up because they're nice, even though they are nice. They show up because we pay them.
Right.
Right? So our tax dollars go to the police, and our budget, which, poor Lauren has to stay up with our treasurer late at night trying to balance a budget. We spend money on that. So it's not like, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't get paid. I'm saying that we're paying for a service, right? So, we don't want to just support whatever the police do because they're being so nice to us. Sometimes they're nice to us, but we pay them, right? So the point being is that we have to decide, is this what we want to do? And I'm not going to make that decision because it's not my house. This is your house, right? And how do we want to, because we're a customer, what's our relation? We actually can say something as a customer, I've said, are we profiling? Do we do that? To another, right? So I just want us to be cognizant for the very important point that you brought up, how we interact and how we think about that. All right, so now I'm supposed to end with a prayer.
However you are called to close.
All right.
Mike, can I say one thing about that, Rabbi Mike?
Please,
can I say one
Rabbi.
thing? So when we hire police, we're not hiring them to address the kinds of folks that civilian responders or co-responders are working with. I mean, synagogues are being attacked by violent people with guns. And so I think it's really important to make that distinction.
It's totally true. And it's also, you know, if you're a person of color, a Jew of color, and you walk up to a synagogue and there's a police officer there, you might have a different response than if you're a white Jew. And that's
Agreed.
one of the
No,
common-
definitely agreed.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And looks like Cheryl wants to say something.
Yes, I do. I was going to back up what Joy said. Again, right now, with those flyers that went into, and I saw what some of those flyers look like online because I'm doing all this research about
The anti-Semitic flyers.
Email I sent out about the stuff at the park. Folks, we've got to have some method of with the synagogues being attacked. And like I said, right now I'm feeling that, and I'm going to be in the city of Stone Mountain on Saturday, community bookstore. I'll plug them, the new activist bookstore there, because I don't exactly feel comfortable right now with hate groups coming, my tax money going to those hate groups, going out there at a park where the same people that lynched Leo Frank 100 years ago, over 100 years ago in 1915, went up there to burn those crosses on Stone Mountain. So you might expect other emails from me. I know that's not really mass incarceration, but that relates to what we're talking about with
Well, it's
fear
connected
and
to
hatred and
dehumanization
the
and
amount of
hate.
anti-Semitism that's gone up and hate crimes, which is 80% according to the Anti-Defamation League since 2016. So thank you.
Yeah, there's a solidarity question here. You know, the ethnicity that's attacked most often are African Americans, and the religion that's attacked most often are Jews, right? When you see a swastika, is it anti-Jewish, anti-black, anti-queer, anti-trans? Yes, right? It's often all of the above, right? So solidarity is, to me, is how we all get free together. Okay, so I'm going to invite us, if we feel comfortable and the person next to us feel comfortable holding hands. Okay with that? Yeah? You asked for a prayer, I'm going to give you a prayer tomorrow, okay? All right. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, our fathers and our mothers. We are here at Congregation Bet Havarim on La Vista Road in Atlanta, Georgia, and we are feeling so many emotions around the issues of a sick criminal justice system and mass incarceration, which is the embodiment of Avel B'Mishpat, of a brokenness, of violence in a justice system, which you have told us to avoid in this week's Torah portion. We ask for your guidance. We ask for a sense of purpose. We ask for a sense of focus. We ask for compassion in our hearts and a sense of commitment that doesn't end today, but that continues. That we have people next to us, strong, resolute souls who are going to keep us together and hold us accountable. We ask that you help us face the enormity of this challenge that was many centuries in being created, and help us do our part, even though it feels small, to know that we are helping every day to walk a little bit closer to your light, to your justice, to your sweetness, and to your love. And we say amen. Amen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tomorrow, that was great.
Thank you.
I'm hoping, we just need a date. Is there anyone who is driving straight north, up towards Roswell, Alpharetta? No, okay. Where? Okay. Oh. You just had a baby?
Yes.
Hold on, I'm getting the picture. Don't beat me up.
Oh my.
Wait, so you're a daddy?